almost quickly. So, today we will be covering the chip shot. The chip shot is the natural progression up from a putt. Reason the sort of the desired ball flight of a chip shot, so to speak, is relatively low, little to no curvature. The definition of a chip shot is spends a longer time on the ground than it does in the air. The reason we hit chip shots, or the reason we would hit chip shots, because the directly in front of the ball is too unpredictable to hit a putt through it, so you have to hit a chip over the obstacle to get to the desired target. Now, club selection and shot selection will be down to the type of chip and type of shot you've got to play. So, for example, if you had a sort of a lot of green to work with, sort of 20 yards and only a small obstacle to clear, then you go for something like a 7, 8 or an iron. But if you had a obstacle way like a bunker, had to carry it a decent distance, and it was too tightly tucked pin, then you go something higher like a 58, 54. So you can chip with sort of a 7 iron all the way up to a 58-degree wedge. And today we'll just be covering sort of the basics with setup and sort of how to start getting used to sort of chipping. So the club selection we'll be using today is a 9 iron. So pretty basic low chip for that. So, how we set up and how we set up to the golf will sort of impact how we deliver the club at impact. So the setup is very important because we need to make sure that we are producing as a consistent sort of impact factors as we can for each shot, so then it's repeatable and we sort of know what distance we can hit our chip. So first things we need to go through is the grip. Need to make sure that we have a neutral grip so we don't sort of manipulate these factors. So I'll show you how to do that. So we like to grip it between sort of just on the top of the fingers, and I want to see sort of you want to be able to see about 2 knuckles when you're looking down, and then the V between the finger and the thumb is pointing at my right shoulder with the left hand. Then with my right, same thing again, just on the top of the fingers, and that V pointing to my right eye. So the reason this is so important is because obviously the grip will manipulate the club face angle and the dynamic loft and sentence of strike. Sorry, not sentence of strike, and the club head speed. So here's why. With a neutral grip, how much I will manipulate the club face angle will be limited because my grip is neutral. So for example, if my grip was stronger, the club face angle would be more closed because I've got a stronger grip, which would decrease the dynamic loft. So, because of these factors, the dynamic loft and the club face angle I'm producing impact would be closed, and because it's closed, less dynamic loft, and the chip shots I'd be hitting would be inconsistent, as I'd be producing different, it wouldn't be consistent, and I'd be hitting sort of low and left chip shots. So by gripping it neutral, like I showed you before, your grip will have a limited influence on the club face angle, and won't affect the club face angle and the dynamic loft as much as it would if you had a stronger grip. Now, the next thing with the grip, because it affects the club head speed. So the further down you sort of grip the club, the less sort of potential force, sort of speed you can create, because the sort of lever system is shorter, and you'll be producing less club head speed, which is what we want, because the chip isn't about sort of speed, it's about control. So when you're gripping the club, I'd like to see it chip down a little bit, because we're not looking to produce loads of speed or create loads of power. So just gripping down is going to give you a little bit more control with your chip shots. So the next thing we want to go through is the aim of the shot. So first thing we need to do when setting up is to make sure that our club face angle is square to the target. Now this may seem quite obvious, but you just need to make sure, because some people don't understand this, you need to make sure that the club face angle is square to the target, because if you were to have the club face angle sort of open or close the target, obviously it's going to affect how you'll deliver that club face angle at impact. So starting at square will give us a better chance at delivering the square at impact. Now, as well as that, we need to make sure that that golf ball is in the middle of our club face when we set up, as this will give us a better chance at hitting the middle of the club face. So, as if I was to move out the toe, with all factors being equal, I would deliver the club with the toe center strike, which would have a negative effect on the chip, and we would be sort of hitting less chips close to the hole and be just making less up and downs in general. So first two things, so you really got to make sure we have that sort of the ball in the middle of the stance. Sorry, the ball in the middle of the club face to give us a better chance at hitting the middle of the club face at impact. Next is our posture and our stance. So with a full shot, you generally have your feet sort of shoulder width apart, where with this, as again, it's about control. We want to have a narrower stance, similar to the trim down of the grip. This is because we don't need a base to create more clubber speed, it's about control. So having that narrow stance is just going to give us a little bit more control when hitting the chip shot. As from here, the wider base is going to make it more about power and not about control. So I'd like to see sort of a relatively narrow stance. And then I'd like to see with sort of how much your weight distribution, I'd like to have more on your lead leg than your trail leg. Now this can be 70%, 30%, and the reason for this is because it's going to encourage you to have a steeper angle of attack. Now that will help us in the middle of the club face, because having a steeper angle of attack is going to make the low point further forward in the stance, so it means we'll be hitting the ball and then the turf and not sort of hitting any fats or anything. So you don't have to do 70-30, you can do 55-45, 60-40, because these will still encourage you to produce a steep angle of attack, and which would encourage the low point to be past the ball, which means you'll be hitting more solid chip shots and and less fats. Now next is obviously the steep angle of attack is going to affect the dynamic loft, because the steeper the angle of attack, the less dynamic loft you're going to produce at impact. So if I was going to have 80-20, dynamic loft would be less there, and then 70-30 you deliver more dynamic loft. So depending on sort of what chip you need to hit would be how much dynamic loft you'd want to produce. So for a relatively low shot like the one we're learning today, we want 70-30, as this is going to help us produce steep angle of attack. Less dynamic loft can help us hit the middle of the club face more often. Next we're going to go through is where do we center the ball, where do we put the ball in our stance. So I'll just grab some bottle. Now generally with the chip, I'd like to see it sort of further back as centre and more towards your trail leg, trail foot. Again, this is to help encourage a sort of steeper angle of attack and sort of produce a sort of lower dynamic loft, so we can hit a bit of a lower chip shot, as we don't want it to be going really high in the air, because that's more like a pitch shot really. So again, so the further back in my stance the ball goes, the further away it goes from the steeper the angle of attack becomes, and the low point goes sort of further this way. Sorry, the ball goes further away from the low point, so we're more hitting the club face. So if I was to have my ball sort of at the very back of my stance, I produce less dynamic loft because the angle of attack is steeper, and the dynamic loft I produce is lower. So then if we were to put the ball in the middle of the stance, this would then mean our angle of attack is a bit shallower, means we'd be hitting a slightly higher chip. So this one's in the middle, weight's the same, higher. So, but for a normal chip and run, I'd like to see it probably just a little bit closer to that trail foot, so not on the back foot, but just slightly back of centre. This will help you have a steep angle of attack, and also hit the middle of the club face a little bit more, just hit a few more consistent chip shots. So that's why we do that. So bare angle approach, hit the middle of the club face a bit more, and produce a nice dynamic loft. And if you were to drop one to, you can change obviously some of these if you need to hit a higher chip shot. Then you can just move the ball slightly further forward in stance, or alternatively use a high lofted club like a 54 or a 58. So the next thing we need to do is make sure that our body is aligned to our target. Now, this again, it might seem obvious, but there's some very important reasoning behind this. Is the why you need to do this every time. So I want to make sure that my feet, my hips, and my shoulders are aligned to the target, because this will have an influence on sort of the path and the shape of the goal point. And since we want a limited amount of shape, we want basically none, we need to try and influence the path as little as we can. So to do this, I'll have my shoulders, my hips, and my feet square to the target, as this will mean that the golfer will essentially affect the path a lot less. So for example, if I was to have my sort of feet out here, my shoulders sort of, so if I had my stance closed and my shoulders still square, the club face is going to start to the ball will go to the right, because the path is going from in to out, meaning that the ball will start to the right. Alternatively, if I was to have my shoulders really open, same thing, it's going to go to the left, because you're going from out to in swing path. So it's really important that we have our sort of our shoulders and our feet and our hips square to the target, so that we can produce a more neutral path, which is going to help us hit a shot that's a little bit straighter and with a lot less shake. So put all the things together, sort of 7% weight on the left, on the lead leg, 30% on the trail leg, and ball slightly back of centre to help that angle of approach, and make sure that we're in the middle of the club face angle square to the target, club ball in the middle of the stance, and then my shoulders and my feet square. Consistent shot and nice strike, and sort of the desired play we're looking for this shot. Well, the next thing, the final thing we need to go over is the sort of what will determine the distance the chip goes, and that would be, well, it's a number of things, but the main thing that would determine the length of the shot is the arc length. So if I was to chip, my arc length was this big, go a certain distance, if my arc length was this big. Now this is because the bigger the arc length, the more club head speed you're going to produce. So for an arc length of this distance, is going to go a lot shorter than an arc length of this distance. And that's because the longer arc length is going to produce more club head speed, which is going to send the ball further. Now, other ways you can manipulate the distance of the golf ball is the dynamic loft, so you could change the club. So if I was to do the similar arc length to what you produced with 54 through, it goes shorter. So yeah, that is the chip shot covered, and that's how we would sort of get the basics down and the setup, and how we'd start getting you going with your chipping.